Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שעשה לי כל צרכי. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר הכין מצעדי גבר.
Let us return now back to the opening chapter 23. This would seem to have been a very significant chapter for the Torah to include in here all of the complicated negotiations that Abraham went through in order to find a burial place for his wife Sarah. And of course, scholars point out that it was important for a number of reasons. Undoubtedly, in ancient times, this sepulcher, the ancient burial place of the patriarchs, of the fathers of the people, was probably a shrine. And therefore, in the historical record, it was significant to them to recite the manner in which this shrine came into being, to make sure that there was no question that it belonged to the people of Israel, that it had been legally purchased and vouchsafed for, and therefore in the minds of the ancient Hebrews it was an important and significant event, one worth recording in the saga of the ancient people, especially the conditions by which it came about. As we read in verse 4, Abraham says, Ger v'toshav anochi machem, I am a resident alien among you. This was an exceptional event, that such a person was permitted to buy the land in the first place, and then was given clear and full legal title. And therefore the place is very well described, the topography, the fact that there was a tree there, the purchase price. All of this is set down very clearly so that the Torah leaves no doubt that this piece of land came into the possession of Abraham. And of course it marks the first time when the people of Israel have ownership of a section of the land. And therefore there has been no time in the history of our people since Abraham when there hasn't been some claim to the land and, according to most scholars, some settlement on the land. This is fine as far as an understanding of the Bible is concerned, but some of the later commentators had their own questions. For instance, the Malbim asks, what contribution does such a story make to the spiritual message and mission of the Torah? Because from our point of view, the Torah has a higher and a deeper significance to us. And there is one very significant answer which is given to by the rabbis. Amar Rab Yudin bar Simon, Rabbi Yudah the son of Simon, replied, Zeh echad me'gimul mekomot, she'ein umot olam yecholim lahonot et Yisrael lomar, gazolim heim b'yadchem. Rabbi Yudin says, this is one of three places in which the nations of the world, other peoples, cannot taunt, cannot accuse Israel, saying, these are stolen lands. You haven't come to the land of Israel properly. And these are they. What are the three places? The cave of Machpelah, this instance, the temple, and the burial place of Joseph. In all three cases, the Bible is clear to point out the manner in which this property came into the hands of the Jewish people, that they have full, clear, and binding legal title. My friends, despite that, and despite what the rabbis say, the nations of the world still taunt Israel and still claim that we don't have our rights to be there. Of course, you have been reading what has been going on in the United Nations these past few weeks, how because the Syrians have continued to allow their infiltrators to kill Israeli lives and to destroy property, that the whole issue, once again, as it is periodically almost every year for the past 18 and a half years, Israel has had to bring its case before the United Nations so that the other Arab nations and other segments of the world will recognize that we are here to stay, we have a legal claim to this land, and that we should be recognized and allowed to live in peace with our neighbors. I mention this specifically because just this week, November 2nd, this past Wednesday, is known now as Balfour Day. It was on November 2nd in 1917 that Lord Balfour, then the foreign minister of Great Britain, declared that the government of Great Britain would legally recognize the claim of the Jewish people to the land of Palestine. And of course, this is the first document in modern times whereby the legal claim of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was recognized. And that document, of course, became the basis by which the old League of Nations gave the mandate to Great Britain so that they would bring about a creation of a state, a Jewish state in Palestine. And of course, because Great Britain subverted that mandate and helped foment difficulties and rivalries between the Jews and the Arabs, after the Second World War, the mandate was then presented to the United Nations, and the United Nations, by a vote of more than 2/3, decided that a Jewish state would be declared. And so here, once again, in modern times, we have the legal basis recognized by the nations of the world whereby Israel has claim to that small, that tiny piece of geography which is ours and which we call Israel. And therefore, we have to continually state, it seems, we have to continually fight, we have to continually remind the nations of the world and the Arab nations that this is ours legally and by right. When the first Zionist groups, when the small colonists began coming to Palestine in 1875 or 76, the end of the 19th century and the beginning of this century, how did they come there? Did they come as conquerors? Did they come taking away the land from Arabs? No, every one of them made sure that they bought the land and had legal title to it. Every little scrap of land that came into Jewish hands up till 1948, till the beginning of the Arab War, because they would not recognize the United Nations decision, every single square inch of land that was in Jewish hands had been bought with clear legal title. The Yeshuv, the Jewish colonists, the Jewish National Fund, came to us, the Jewish people of the world, and said, we now have an opportunity to come back to the land. The Arabs are willing to sell. We are willing to buy. And this was the manner in which the Jews returned to the land, just as did ancient Abraham. Nobody was driven off the land. No Arab was driven off his soil or his house. No one was forced to sell. On the contrary, the old Turks and the Arabs at the time of the British Mandate were quite anxious. They got good money for the land, even as Ekron the Hittite got more than enough from Abraham for that little parcel of land. The Arabs were given good money for their land, and the Jews were able to acquire clear and legal title. And so therefore, whatever they now proclaim in the United Nations is an attempt on their part to forge the very record of history, to say that the Jews have no claim to that land, to say that the Arabs were driven out, to say that this property still belongs to them. This is a forgery, an attempt to rewrite history. And of course, we will not let them get away with it. Just as the ancient writers of the Torah were clear to record exactly how Abraham came to have this piece of land, and therefore it was the legal title of the people of Israel, and therefore this was the place in which they could bury their forefathers, so we too have to remind over and over again the record of history, how we came to be in Palestine, how we purchased the land, how the nations of the world recognized us, how the Balfour Declaration set a legal basis, how the League of Nations ratified the Balfour Declaration, how the United Nations reached a decision, how there have been continual decisions both in the Security Council and the General Assembly indicating that the Jewish people in Israel are there by right. They have as much claim to that land as any people anywhere in the world have a claim to the land where they are, and therefore Israel is there to stay. So the rabbis remind us, Omer Rab Yudin, She'ein umot ha'olam yecholim lahonot et Yisrael. Let not the nations of the world taunt. Let not them point the finger. Let not them raise any questions about Israel, that perhaps these are stolen lands. From the very earliest biblical days, we were careful to record how we came to the land, that God had promised the land to us, but that was not enough, that the land was purchased and the land was validated, and therefore the land is legally ours. And so even in our own day, let not the nations taunt us. Let us be able to come up and state before the United Nations in the name of Father Abraham, in the name of the Jewish people throughout all history, in the name of the 6 million of our people who were destroyed, in the name of those colonists who came, who bought the land, who tilled the land, who saw to it that that land would be a place where the Jewish people were able to come. Let them say that no force in the world will be able to remove us from the land, because since the days of Abraham, even to this day, the land is ours. Amen. Let us therefore read this week's Torah portion, Chayei, which begins on page 80.